Many landlords buy one rental property and stop there, not because they plan to, but because scaling beyond the first property turns out to be harder than they expected. The first deal may feel manageable, but building a portfolio introduces new pressures, new risks, and new decisions, and this is where many landlords become stuck. In this video, I'll explain why some landlords successfully grow portfolios over time while others remain at one property indefinitely, and what usually makes the difference. One of the biggest misunderstandings in buy-to-let is thinking that portfolio growth simply means buying more houses. In reality, scaling is about building a system that remains stable as complexity increases. More properties mean more mortgages, more maintenance, more tenants, and more exposure to problems. So the challenge is not getting the next property. The challenge is making sure the overall position still works once you have it. That is why many landlords stop after the first purchase, because the next stage feels much more demanding. Weak cash flow is one of the biggest reasons landlords struggle to scale. If the first property only produces a very small surplus, there is little room to build reserves or save towards another deposit. The property may technically work, but it does not generate enough momentum to support future growth. Over time, the landlord becomes dependent on their own salary or savings to keep expanding. That slows everything down and increases pressure. Strong portfolios are usually built on properties that generate healthy, realistic cash flow from the start. Another reason portfolios fail to grow is that all the income gets taken out immediately. Rental profit becomes lifestyle income instead of growth capital. That might feel rewarding in the short term, but it limits the portfolio's ability to expand. Many experienced landlords reinvest at least part of the surplus back into the portfolio, whether through reserves, maintenance, or future deposits. Growth becomes much harder if every pound produced by the property disappears straight away. Reinvestment is one of the quiet drivers behind long-term scaling. For many landlords, the first property already feels like a significant financial responsibility. So adding a second or third property can feel risky even if the numbers technically work. More debt, more exposure, and more uncertainty naturally create hesitation, and that hesitation is understandable. Portfolio growth only works when the landlord feels financially stable enough to tolerate the extra complexity. If the first property already feels stressful, scaling becomes psychologically difficult regardless of the numbers on paper. The first property has a huge impact on what happens next. If it produces weak cash flow, requires constant repairs, or creates management problems, it often slows future growth dramatically. Instead of creating confidence and financial stability, the property creates caution. This is why experienced investors focus heavily on buying strong first deals, rather than simply getting started. A solid first property can support expansion. A weak first property often becomes a warning sign that discourages scaling entirely. Many landlords underestimate how important reserves are. A portfolio without a cash buffer becomes fragile very quickly. One boiler replacement, one long void period, or one unexpected repair can create immediate stress. And when a landlord feels financially exposed, they become much less willing to grow further. Strong portfolios usually keep liquidity available even when opportunities to buy more properties exist, because resilience matters more than speed. A portfolio should survive problems comfortably, not only function in perfect conditions. Interestingly, some landlords fail to scale because they try to scale too aggressively. They buy several properties quickly without building enough operational or financial stability first. At the beginning, growth feels exciting, but eventually the pressure catches up. Mortgages, maintenance, tax, and management all increase together. If the underlying cash flow is not strong enough, the portfolio starts to feel unstable. Sustainable scaling usually happens more slowly than social media or property marketing will suggest. As portfolios grow, financing becomes more complicated. Lenders begin looking not only at the individual property, but also at the landlord's wider financial position. Existing mortgages, income levels, stress tests, and portfolio performance all matter. This surprises many landlords who assume they can simply repeat the same process indefinitely. In reality, scaling requires increasingly careful financial planning, and if the early properties are weak, it becomes harder to secure favourable borrowing for future purchases. Tax also becomes more important as portfolios expand. A landlord with one property may not feel a major impact initially, but several properties producing income can change the overall tax position significantly. This reduces the amount of profit available for reinvestment. Some landlords underestimate this and assume portfolio growth will happen faster than it realistically can. Understanding tax early helps create a more realistic expectations about how quickly a portfolio can actually scale. Managing multiple properties is very different from managing one. There are more tenants, more renewals, more compliance checks, and more ongoing decisions. Some landlords enjoy this side of the business. Others quickly realize they dislike the operational workload. That often becomes a hidden ceiling on portfolio growth, because even if the finances work, the landlord may simply not want the additional complexity. Scaling requires both financial capacity and operational tolerance. Market uncertainty also affects growth. Interest rate rises, policy changes, and negative headlines can make landlords more cautious. Even profitable landlords sometimes stop scaling because they no longer feel confident about future conditions. And in some cases, caution is sensible. The important point is that successful portfolio building usually requires long-term thinking rather than reacting emotionally to every market cycle. Landlords who scale sustainably tend to focus on fundamentals rather than short-term noise. One major difference between landlords who scale and those who do not is mindset. Successful portfolio builders tend to think in decades rather than months. They accept that growth will be gradual, uneven, and occasionally frustrating. They focus on consistency instead of speed. And importantly, they understand that setbacks are normal. That long-term perspective often makes scaling feel calmer, more manageable, because the focus is on steady progress rather than rapid expansion. Landlords who build sustainable portfolios usually focus on a few core principles. They buy deals with realistic cash flow, they keep buffers available, they grow gradually, and they avoid overstretching financially. Most importantly, they prioritize stability over appearance. A smaller portfolio with strong fundamentals is often far more resilient than a large portfolio built too aggressively. The strongest landlords are usually more disciplined than dramatic. The key point is simple. Portfolio growth is not mainly about ambition, it's about stability. Landlords scale successfully when their properties generate enough resilience to support gradual expansion over time. Weak cash flow, poor structure, lack of buffers, and rushed growth usually create the opposite outcome. The strongest portfolios are rarely built quickly. They are built carefully, consistently, and with realistic expectations. Building a property portfolio is a long-term process, not a short-term sprint. And understanding why many landlords become stuck helps you avoid the same mistakes yourself, because sustainable growth is usually less about buying faster and more about building stronger foundations first. This is the Practical Landlord.